a drifter, a prostitute, a killer. Aileen Wuornos was many things, but to the world, she became something no one expected: America's first female serial killer. Her story is one of trauma, violence, and controversy, where the line between victim and villain becomes dangerously thin. Aileen Wuornos was born Aileen Carol Pittman on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her early life was marked by instability, abuse, and abandonment factors that played a significant role in shaping her troubled future. Aileen's mother, Diane Wuornos, was just 14 when she married her father, Leo Arthur Pittman, who was 16. The marriage was short-lived and abusive, ending before Aileen was born. Her father was a diagnosed schizophrenic with a long criminal history, including child molestation. He was incarcerated at the time of Aileen's birth and later died by suicide in prison in 1969. Diane abandoned Aileen and her older brother, Keith, when Aileen was around 4 years old, leaving them in the care of their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, who adopted them. Life with her grandparents was far from stable. Aileen's grandparents raised her in a rural and often harsh environment. Lori Wuornos would make her pull her pants down and beat her with a belt on her bare skin. Aileen later claimed that her grandfather was also sexually abusive. Britta Wuornos was an alcoholic who never stepped in to stop it. When Aileen was just 6 years old, she and her brother Keith would set fires using lighter fluid. She ended up getting severely burned. By the age of 11, Aileen was engaging in sexual activity in exchange for cigarettes, food, and drugs, as well as having sex with her own brother. She also claimed to have been raped multiple times during her youth. At 14, she became pregnant after being raped by a friend of her grandfather. She gave birth to a baby boy who was placed for adoption on March 23, 1971. Not long after, Aileen's grandmother passed away from liver failure, and her grandfather kicked her and her brother out of the house. This is when Aileen began hitchhiking and living in the woods and on the streets. Aileen Wuornos' early life was a complex tapestry of trauma, abuse, and survival instincts. These years were the foundation for the troubled, violent path she would later take, culminating in the series of murders that would make her infamous. Despite her crimes, many believe Aileen's early life of abuse, neglect, and trauma deeply influenced her psychological state and contributed to her eventual breakdown. Before Aileen Wuornos became a serial killer, before the world knew her name, she had already spent over a decade drifting through arrests, violence, and desperation. Her criminal past didn't begin with murder, but it certainly set the stage for what was to come. This is the criminal history of Aileen Wuornos before the killing began. It was 1974. Aileen was just 18 years old. She was arrested in Michigan for drunk driving, disorderly conduct, and firing a .22 caliber pistol from a moving vehicle. It was reckless, dangerous, and it wouldn't be the last time she held a gun. When she failed to show up for her court date, a warrant was issued. It was the beginning of a long, tangled relationship with the law. By 1976, Aileen was living under an alias Sandra Critchas. She hitchhiked her way across the country. That year, she was arrested in Colorado for prostitution. The charges were minor, but they revealed a pattern. Survival sex work became a way of life. As the 1980s began, so did more serious charges. In 1981, Aileen was arrested in Edgewater, Florida for armed robbery. She held up a convenience store and made off with just $35 and some cigarettes. The sentence: 13 months behind bars. It was her first felony conviction, and a sign that her crimes were becoming more desperate. Over the next few years, Aileen racked up more arrests: forgery, check, fraud, theft, and shoplifting. In 1986, police found her in Miami driving a stolen car. Inside, ammunition, a .38 pistol, and several stolen ID cards. She resisted arrest and gave officers a false name. The charges: auto theft, obstruction, and carrying a weapon without a license. Later that same year, she was arrested again, this time with her girlfriend, Tyria Moore, on outstanding warrants and weapons violations. By 1987, the arrests were nearly constant. Prostitution-related charges, disorderly conduct, and even assault. In one case, she attacked a man with a beer bottle. In another, she threatened a bus driver who told her to leave. She was drifting from county to county, living in cheap motels, panhandling, and fighting. Aileen's criminal record was long. But what's most disturbing is how quickly things were escalating. From petty theft to armed robbery, from prostitution to violence. Each charge pulled her deeper into instability. She was angry, isolated, and armed. And by late 1989, she wouldn't just be stealing, she'd start killing. The justice system saw her as a repeat offender, but they didn't see what was coming next. Between November 1989 and November 1990, 7 men were killed along the highways of Central Florida, each of them shot, each found or never found in desolate, rural locations. November 30th, 1989. Richard Mallory, 51 years old, owner of an electronics repair shop in Clearwater, Florida. Mallory was known to have a troubled past, including a stint in a psychiatric facility. He picked up Wuornos along US Route 19. According to her later testimony, he drove them to a wooded area for sex, where he became violent. Wuornos claimed Mallory beat, raped, and sodomized her. She said she shot him in self-defense with a .22 caliber pistol 4 times, including 2 to the chest. His body was found 2 weeks later, wrapped in a piece of carpet off a deserted logging road in Volusia County. His abandoned Cadillac was found miles away, and Wuornos had taken some of his belongings. This was the only murder that her defense would later argue as justified. May 19, 1990. David Spears, 43, a construction worker from Winter Garden, Florida. He had recently separated from his wife and was headed to Tampa when he disappeared. His nude body was discovered in Citrus County, near a remote road. He had been shot 6 times with a .22 caliber weapon. No signs of robbery. His truck was later found abandoned. Unlike Mallory, there was no indication of any assault or struggle on Spears, portraying suspicions about Wuornos' claim of self-defense. May 31, 1990, just 12 days after Spears, Charles Skadden, a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker from Missouri, became the 3rd victim. His body was found in Pasco County, having been shot a staggering 9 times. This level of overkill raised alarm with investigators. Wuornos took his car and some of his personal items. The pattern was becoming clear. She wasn't just killing, she was eliminating. June 1990. Peter Seams, 65, a retired merchant seaman traveling from Jupiter, Florida to Arkansas to visit family. Unlike the others, his body was never recovered, but his car was found in Orange Springs, crashed and abandoned. Witnesses reported seeing 2 women Wuornos and her girlfriend, Tyria, were fleeing the scene. Fingerprints inside the car matched Wuornos, though there was no body. The stolen car and missing person report linked Wuornos to another possible murder. July 31st, 1990. Troy Eugene Burris, 50, a delivery driver for a sausage company in Ocala. He left for work and never returned. His delivery truck was found abandoned, and after days of searching, his badly decomposed body was discovered in a wooded area on August 4th. He had been shot twice. Once again, Wuornos had taken his vehicle and some personal effects. The randomness and lack of motive worried authorities. It didn't seem to be about money. September 11th, 1990. Charles Humphreys, 56, a retired Air Force major, former police chief, and a child abuse investigator. He was en route to work when he picked up one. His body was found fully clothed, shot 6 times in Marion County. His car, badge, and gun were missing. Of all the victims, Humphreys had the highest public profile. His murder grabbed the attention of law enforcement, and the media. This case was no longer in the shadows. November 19th, 1990. Walter Gino Antonio, 62, a truck driver, part-time security guard, and former reserve police officer. His nude body was found near a logging road in Dixie County, shot 4 times in the back and head. His vehicle was found 5 days later in Brevard County. At this point, investigators had compiled a profile and a suspect list stand. Aileen Wuornos was on their radar. This would be her last known kill before being arrested 2 months later. 7 men, all shot, most stripped, several robbed, some never found. Each man had offered Aileen Wuornos a ride. Each paid for it with his life. She would later say, "I did it to survive. They were all gonna rape me." But only one victim, Richard Mallory, had any history suggesting violence. The others, family men, veterans, workers. Aileen Wuornos didn't hide what she'd done. She confessed without hesitation, showing moments of both anger and calm. But her story never changed. She believed she had no choice. The murders made headlines. The trial turned her into a spectacle. But the truth behind those 7 killings still sparks debate to this day. By late 1990, law enforcement had a growing list of dead men, truckers, laborers, and former law officers, all killed along Florida's highways. They didn't have a face, but they had a pattern, and a break in the case was just around the corner. What they discovered would lead them to Aileen Wuornos, a volatile drifter with a criminal past, and a confession that stunned the nation. It started with the missing persons report for Peter Seams, whose car had been found crashed and abandoned in Orange Springs. 2 women were seen fleeing the scene. Fingerprints lifted from the interior matched a convicted felon, Aileen Carol Wuornos. She had a long rap sheet for prostitution, theft, and weapons charges. Investigators soon tied her to several of the murdered men, many of whom had recently visited areas known for prostitution. On January 9, 1991, Aileen was found at the Last Resort, a biker bar in Port Orange, Florida. She was drinking alone when undercover officers moved in and quietly took her into custody on outstanding warrants. At the time, they didn't charge her with murder. They needed a confession, and to get it, they turned to the one person Aileen seemed to care about: Terria Moore, her former lover. Police located Terria Moore in Pennsylvania. She was frightened and overwhelmed, unaware of the full scope of Aileen's crimes. She agreed to cooperate in exchange for full immunity. Over the course of several days, Terria placed recorded phone calls to Aileen from the police station. She pleaded with Aileen to help her, saying she was going to be blamed. She begged for the truth. Aileen's response: she cracked. On January 16, 1991, Aileen Wuornos confessed to the murders of 6 men. She admitted to pulling the trigger each time, but she insisted it was all done in self-defense. Her voice was calm, even cold. "I robbed them, and I killed them because they were going to rape me." She detailed the murders in chilling clarity. She said most of them had picked her up for sex, and something had gone wrong. She was cooperative, but she never expressed regret. The confession quickly made headlines. America was stunned. A female serial killer who murdered not out of lust or psychosis, but according to her, out of rage and survival. The media called her the damsel of death, highway killer, and America's first female serial killer in modern terms. The state called her something else: a premeditated murderer who used sex to lure men and then executed them for profit. Wuornos was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder. As she sat in jail, she gave a series of rambling, sometimes erratic interviews. She remained adamant: "I hate human life, and I'd kill again. I killed them because I had to." Her attorneys debated whether she was mentally competent, but Aileen herself insisted on pleading guilty and moving forward. Aileen Wuornos had confessed. There was no mystery, only the long road to trial, and eventually execution. But was she a cold-blooded predator, or a broken woman who believed violence was the only way to survive? By early 1991, Aileen Wuornos had confessed to 6 murders. She claimed it was self-defense over and over, but prosecutors saw a pattern: a killer who used sex to lure, then execute. Now, it was time to prove it in court. Although Wuornos admitted to multiple killings, prosecutors strategically focused on just one case first: the murder of Richard Mallory, the first known victim. Why? Because they believed it was the most winnable case, and a conviction could justify the death penalty. The trial for Richard Mallory's murder began on January 13, 1992, in Volusia County. Wuornos appeared in court with short-cropped hair, shackled, and mostly silent. The prosecution painted her as a calculated predator, not a woman fighting for her life. They introduced evidence that she had robbed Mallory, shot him multiple times, and fled with his car and belongings. Then, they dropped a bombshell. Under Florida's Williams rule, the prosecution was allowed to present evidence from other murders to show a pattern of behavior. Suddenly, jurors weren't just hearing about Mallory, they were hearing about all 6 men. Her public defenders tried to argue that Mallory had raped Wuornos, that she had feared for her life. They brought up his past. Mallory had once served time for attempted sexual assault, but it wasn't enough. There were no signs of a struggle, no injuries to Wuornos, and the robbery weakened her credibility. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. On January 27, 1992, Aileen Wuornos was found guilty of first-degree murder. 2 days later, she was sentenced to death. She stood in court and said, "I'm sorry I did what I did. I'm sorry I killed that man. I gave him a chance. He could have walked away, but the state wasn't finished." Rather than go through 6 lengthy trials, Wuornos eventually pleaded guilty to 5 additional murders. Each plea came with the same result: another death sentence. Even in court, Wuornos remained unpredictable, sometimes weeping, sometimes raging, sometimes indifferent. To the families of the victims, she often said nothing. As her case gained attention, questions began to swirl. Was Aileen Wuornos mentally ill? Psychiatrists diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and possibly schizophrenia. But the courts found her legally sane, capable of understanding right from wrong. Meanwhile, the media frenzy exploded. Wuornos became a spectacle, America's first modern female serial killer, televised and sensationalized. Her story inspired books, documentaries, and eventually, the film Monster. Aileen Wuornos spent more than 10 years on Florida's death row. Over time, she grew increasingly paranoid and angry. In 2001, she fired her lawyers, stopped all appeals, and demanded to be executed. She told the court, "I'm one who seriously hates human life and would kill again." On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She was 46 years old. No family, no final appeals, no goodbyes. Her final words were strange, unsettling. "I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back." In the end, Aileen wasn't just a killer. She was a product of trauma abuse, abandonment, exploitation, a life shaped by neglect, spiraling into rage, violence, and ultimately, death. She left behind no legacy of peace, only victims, only questions. Could someone have saved her? Could any of it have been prevented? Or was she always on this path? Those are questions we may never fully answer, but her story remains a haunting reminder of what happens when society looks the other way, until it's far too late.